Hi there, welcome back to Boating Insights. My name is Neil Driscoll, and for today's episode, I'm going to be running through some of the things to think about when you are going on a bareboat charter holiday. So you've picked your destination, you've got your friends and family organised, you've got the dates, you've booked the boat, and these are some of the things just to think about in the lead up to getting ready to jumping on board and heading out for your first couple of days. So first of all, just making sure in terms of paperwork, obviously stuff like travel insurance and getting documents to the charter company, but particularly allowing for lead time if you are applying for things like a marine radio license, which you need pretty much everywhere you charter a boat now. Obviously, we can help you with that if you don't have one already. And of course, the International Certificate of Competence is required in a pretty wide area. These things need time to arrive with you, so you just need to make sure that you sort of worked backwards from that and reach out to us if you've got any questions. Then we can help give you a bit of a timeline of when you need to get your ducks in a row. The other side of that is if you've got all your paperwork, you've got your licenses and things, it's a really good idea just to make sure that you have them somewhere that you can access online if you need to, just in a sort of secure digital environment, that if you, for example, lose something or you leave it behind, that you can log into your own secure kind of online platform and make sure that you can find that and that you've got what you need in case you do what I did, which is left my ICC on my desk when I went to Greece from Sydney for my honeymoon a fair while ago. Unfortunately, I did have the online version and it was a massive saving grace of what would have been quite a significant headache if I hadn't had that. So yeah, just make sure you get your ducks in a row for the paperwork and allocate enough time to get all of that side of things done. The next thing is in terms of the packing, especially if you've got people coming who haven't been before. Some of this stuff's fairly obvious, but just making sure that people know about shoes, if they, things like masks and snorkels, if they need to bring them, or if they're provided, if they're comfortable using a provided snorkel, that sort of stuff. Especially things like, do we need towels, bedding? Over the years, I've kind of missed a memo on pretty much everything you can think of for that stuff. So it's quite useful to know. Obviously, things like the baggage, making sure you don't end up with people bringing hard-sided suitcases, especially if they are part of a bigger trip that they're on, and you might need to consider just having a soft bag and you being able to leave some of the hard bags in a storage facility or somewhere with the charter company, so you don't have to take everything on board. Because stashing a massive 10 people's hard suitcases is pretty much going to take out an entire cabin otherwise. And just make sure people know well in advance. So if you can kind of just let them know things that they need like that, thinking about obviously things like medication and stuff, but what clothing they're going to need, what's already on board, and of course the luggage, because it's really embarrassing for someone as well if they turn up and they're the only one that didn't realise they can't bring a huge hard wheelie suitcase onto a boat very easily. And the next thing is provisioning. So 101, just don't overdo it. Often you only really need snacks and drinks, but it's a really good idea just to make sure that you've got a rough idea of where options are, especially if it's fringe seasons where places might be shut, or going the other way actually if it's peak season and it's quite tricky to get in somewhere. But often people will go nuts for this stuff. You really don't often need that much. Most of the time, part of the fun of this is going into places and having some food, but it really varies. If you're going on a holiday somewhere like the Mediterranean, then there's often a huge amount of options available. If you're going somewhere like the Whitsundays in Australia, then you probably do need to be fairly self-sufficient for the whole thing. So it's just important to sort of get a bit of an idea of what the provisioning looks like, how many places are open, if it's fringe season particularly, that's really important, and also just what the options are for reprovisioning, because you'd probably be a bit devastated, for example, if you were in the Med and you've filled up in a supermarket and day one you kind of you're in this beautiful little village and there's this amazing market where you could just buy this fresh produce from the farmers straight from the side of the boat, and you find yourself that you've already got more than you need. So just have a bit of a think there, because often that kind of wandering around the local area and getting the produce is a real high point for, if not everyone on board, then certainly some of the people. So try not to get too much, because you can often get things almost everywhere along the way on most of the well-trodden routes. The exception being the other way, somewhere like the Whitsundays, you can really only get anything that you would want in Hamilton Island or Ellie Beach. So likewise there, that's not a big deal, but it can wipe out quite a bit of time that you might not want to spend on your holiday having to kind of just get to one of those places. So that's why sometimes it's gold, other times you probably do need to be pretty much set up for the whole week. So just kind of cover that and make sure you've got an idea. And also for people coming on board, that's normally kind of helpful for them to have a rough idea, especially if they're new to boating, like, oh, we are setting up for the whole week here, just like if you're going off-grid camping or something like that. Or actually, we're basically just setting up on a day-to-day, and that's all we really need to worry about. Now, the next thing is the safety briefing. So the safety briefing should really be a specific thing that happens where you sit down, everyone has a bit of a chat. It shouldn't be too long. You as a skipper need to make sure that you've actually figured out the information first. Don't do it on the fly. It's boring for everyone. It'll take ages, it's disengaging, and it doesn't make any sense. So just make sure that you've thought about what you want to talk about. Obviously the obvious stuff like life jackets, location, use, etc., fire extinguishers, first aid kits, emergency procedures, the operation of the marine VHF radio, any beacons, that kind of stuff. And then at a sensible time, make sure you just kind of have a quick sit down with everyone and run through the key safety things that they're going to need to know. And when you are going through that, just if there are sort of more detailed things, you might pick one or two people in the crew who are more nautically minded or more experienced, that you might just go through some of the more detailed stuff like the emergency shut-off switches or specific seacocks or things that you might want other people to be able to do other than you, but you're not necessarily going to upskill everyone on everything because it'd probably be information overload. Then also, if you have a copy of our emergency action card, which you'd have pretty much from doing any of our courses that I can think of, then you will be able to make sure you take a printed copy of that. We've got the international one where you can put the boat's name on it when you get there in case you get given a different boat. Grab the MMSI out of the radio, pop it onto that international emergency action card, and you can just blue tack it close to the radio so that you can make sure that everyone has got that written in English and easy to find with all of the key information. Now, running through from there, the boat familiarisation, so like we got the cart before the hull here, but you'll have gone through the boat familiarisation hopefully with a representative of the company. They can vary from being extremely comprehensive to lighter than you can imagine. So a bit of preparation on your behalf is really key here. This is where the online skipper in particular is really useful. So you've had a bit of a think about which systems you want to know about, and just during the walkthrough, don't be shy to ask questions. If possible, see if you can ask if it's all right if someone that's with you can just video key information as well as you're going through. Obviously ask out of manners first. Making sure that you're making a note of any pre-existing damage, and hopefully you don't have to get to a point on day one of your holiday of kind of counting spoons and forks and all that sort of stuff, but just make sure there's a bit of an understanding if you can see any damage on board or anything like that, that's recorded somewhere, so that it's not a bit of an awkward conversation later. And then going through, if you've got questions, make sure that you know how to do things like change over the water tanks, what happens with the toilets, how do we get them pumped out, all that sort of stuff is kind of really important. So feel comfortable to ask questions and make a note of everything. And if there is a boat manual, which will vary, boat's a bit like an Airbnb, sometimes you wouldn't believe the level of information you get, and sometimes it's almost nothing. So if there is a boat manual, have someone following you and just double check that they're locating that information there. So if someone sort of says, oh yeah, it's all in the manual, just have a look and make sure that their view of what's in the manual and your view of what's in the manual aligns, and that you can actually reference it and find what you need when you need it. Now, that sort of feeds in as well, of course, to the navigation side of things. So just make sure you got a rough idea how to use the chart plotter. I wouldn't expect them to go through that in detail with you, but make sure you can kind of find the key functions, find the vessel position, change the screens, turn the autopilot off and on, understand if there are any sort of readouts coming through for stuff like the engine controls, what temperature the engine should be sitting at, if there's any alarms that might be going off. And especially a lot of vessels now will have a kind of a digital screen on new vessels to sort of go through and control stuff in the way that you used to have just a switch panel. So there's also often circuit breakers, and the more advanced boats get, the more of these there'll be. So that would be, for example, you've got an on-off that might control like a specific system or network of power, but then you'll also have circuit breakers somewhere for things like the anchor windlass, any electric winches, the bow thruster, that kind of thing. So just make sure you ask where they are, because there's a reasonable chance that you might have to access them and use them, and you don't really want to have to be calling the charter company if your breaker's gone on the anchor windlass when it's half up and half down, and you're sort of drifting sideways. So just get on top of all of that when you're going through the handover, and make sure that you've sort of thought about what you want to know beforehand. And as I'm sure we've gone through that in detail with the online skipper course, which is good for you, and ideally other people who are going to be actively involved in the boat have gone through as well. Now, in terms of your navigation planning, I wouldn't say that you need to do heaps here. Like, you want to understand the area, hopefully have a bit of a hit list of the key places you want to go. All of the charter companies will always have like sample itineraries and that sort of stuff. I'd more encourage you, rather than just go, oh, okay, there's like 8 itineraries depending on which way the wind's blowing. Just see like where are they actually recommending that we go, and do we really care? Because you might find that if they recommend 8 places, you really care about 3 or 4 of them, and a couple of them, don't really matter. And just make sure that you don't accidentally waste a day going somewhere you're not too bothered about. I usually just try and make sure I know where the place is that we're going to get to on the first night, because often you won't get out till sort of 3-4 o'clock, maybe even later. And so you don't normally want to be going for more than about an hour. It's very much just a quick shakedown, get somewhere, get comfortable, and have a nice dinner. And the second day, you usually don't want to be too ambitious. Everyone's on holiday. And then if you've got a rough idea of where you're aiming for, you'll see as the weather unfolds. If most places that you'll be chartering boats are not tidal. If they are tidal and they've got variable weather, which is relatively unusual, then you'll want to be reviewing that as you go and get kind of comfortable with the boat. So you've got an idea for the first couple of days. I wouldn't try and over plan personally. I'd just make sure that you plan each day and look at it the day before, and make sure you talk to other people on board about things that they particularly want to do. But I'd aim to have a hit list and make sure that you're just not too ambitious for your first day. Now, some of the other details that you might want in the handover process are things like local regulations, if there's places that you're not allowed to fish, or age restrictions for maybe young people, like kids wearing life jackets, or some places even have rules about the age of people being allowed to be the one actually like steering the boat. Obviously prohibited anchoring areas. Hopefully they've made all that sort of stuff quite clear for you. Especially on the powerboat, you probably want some idea of the fuel consumption rates. Very unusual that you'd need to fuel up during a week, but it's a good idea just to make sure that you kind of understand that stuff, but particularly that you're not doing anything wrong. So if there's areas that you can't go, can't fish, can't moor, that kind of stuff, it's usually very clear, but just double check that that's all sort of laid out for you. And also within that, the other way, like recommendations like great places to anchor, or if I get somewhere and it's too busy and I can't get into the main little port, are there other places I can go, or what are my options? And just have a bit of a chat. Usually they're really happy to share that information, but it's often led by the customer asking rather than them sort of trying to push too much information, because when they're doing a handover, they're usually quite conscious that it can end up being information overload for people. Now, the next thing is the communication on board. So it's really important to make sure that people do know how to operate the VHF radio in case something happens to the skipper. Make sure that you understand how to get a position if you need to be able to transmit that, and that people understand sort of the DSC functions and what's going on there. If there is an EPIRB, it's probably a good idea just to let people know. So hopefully super unlikely that they'll need it, but there's also, don't forget, even if the vessel's fine, they could well have medical emergencies where they need to just call in, and they might be in another language, in an unfamiliar place. And especially if they're not familiar with boating, you having taken the time to just go through some of that information can potentially be quite life-saving and actually settle people down. And that might be stuff that you go through maybe on the second morning rather than trying to do all of that before you leave the dock, because there's a lot when people are sort of trying to get on board, unpack, figure out where we're going, do the boat handover. So it's important as part of your induction for others that you're thinking about when is the best time for us to go through this, so that it's actually valuable and useful knowledge for them, and I'm not giving them a massive information overload just so I make myself feel comfortable that I've relayed all of this to someone else, even if they can't remember it. Now, that first day, just the boat, you've headed out, you've got everyone on board, you've done a little safety brief, hopefully, and just sort of the key information that they'll need. And now we need to just think about what you've got to do. So in terms of sea trials, I find the most important thing is for you to understand how to stop and turn and get control when you're changing direction. If you've got thrusters, just make sure you have a bit of a go of them in open space. Make sure that you've gone through with people potentially before you leave what the docking procedure is going to look like when they come in. So it's kind of gold when the boat's moored that you can sort of talk to them about what the critical points will be when they can see things, and you're not just hoping that they're picturing what you're saying, but really just making sure that you're comfortable that if you need to, you can get the boat started, stopped, turn, that you understand sort of how much power is available from the thrusters, so that when you come in, you can then just have a go at taking it nice and slow and mooring up wherever you need to, and picking somewhere for the first night that's got relatively easy mooring is normally quite a smart idea. On that note, if you are particularly somewhere like the Mediterranean, where you're often doing that sort of anchoring or lazy line and then coming in against a wall, if that's not something you're particularly familiar with or you haven't done for a while, it's a really good idea that first morning when you head out, just if you go a bit after everyone else, just have an extra coffee, give everyone a chance to get out and quite like kind of clear out. And then if you can, just have a practice of doing a couple first thing there while it's still nice and light wind, everyone's fresh, and just go, let's just do a couple of these now so we all understand what we're doing when we go into different places. And it can be a really useful experience for everyone on board. Not least, of course, the skipper, who may be very experienced but probably not on that specific boat. And then finally, just remember, smile. You are on holiday, and day one is a big one. So it can take a lot to organise this, and this is where having the crew, when I say crew, I mean people who are actively involved in the operation of the boat rather than just passengers who are literally not doing anything. So if you've got the crew, getting them through the online skipper course is ideal, just so that they can be active and helpful and they understand what they're supposed to be doing, and it's not all on you to try and explain. Especially if people are new to boating, they'll get so much more out of the holiday for just making that small investment of time and money in a course like that. And the other thing is, of course, with the online skipper, because you get the lifetime access, then it can be reviewed before future holidays. So if you've then got a different boat, maybe one that's got another hull or a different location, all that sort of stuff, or you're going from power to sail, sail to power, mono to multi, all that kind of stuff, then you can just run through it before any holiday and just double check that you have retained everything and that you're ready to go. So I hope you're using this to get out and do some awesome adventures. Some of my favourite holidays have been bareboat charter holidays, and I'm sure will continue to be for evermore. And hopefully this has got you a bit inspired. So thanks for listening. Bye.